This week, the shadowy figure of the nun returns to terrorize audiences in The Nun 2. When this malevolent entity first glided onto our screens in The Conjuring 2, it became an instant icon of modern horror. The scene where its silhouette detaches from the wall, moving across the room to merge with a haunted painting, is a masterclass in suspense, a sequence that burrows deep into the primal fear of the dark. While much of the Conjuring universe draws from the real-life case files of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, many have assumed that The Nun, or to use its demonic name, Valak, was a purely fictional creation, a Hollywood monster designed for maximum fright. The truth, however, is far more complex and deeply rooted in the soil of English folklore. The cinematic nun is not Valak, the treasure-finding, serpent-commanding demon from the 17th century grimoire, The Lesser Key of Solomon. Instead, its inspiration is a chilling amalgam of two separate, terrifying experiences from the Warrens' career, with the most significant part of its legend originating from one of the most haunted buildings in Great Britain. This location, a place of spectral infamy, is the true birthplace of the story. To understand The Nun, we must leave the realm of Hollywood and travel to a quiet, unassuming village in Essex, where the ghost of a tragic nun has walked for centuries. This is the story of Borley Rectory, the house that earned the chilling epithet, the most haunted house in England. The genesis of a haunting, a foundation of blood and faith. To stand on the grounds where Borley Rectory once stood is to feel the weight of history pressing down. The air in this corner of southeast England feels heavy, charged with the memory of what was. As the paranormal investigator Harry Price once declared, "I'm quite convinced beyond any shadow of doubt that the house that stood just across the road was and fully lived up to its name as the most haunted house in England." The story begins not with ghosts, but with architecture. In 1862, the Bull family commissioned the construction of a grand, red-brick Victorian rectory. It was a manifestation of faith and stature, intended to serve as a home for the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull and his large family. But this was not a new beginning. The rectory was built upon the ashes of a previous one, which had been destroyed in a fire in 1841. This ground was already old, already steeped in history. For centuries, Borley had been a bastion of Christianity, with a monastery established nearby as far back as 1360. And with such a long history comes dark legends. The foundational myth of Borley, the story that would become the lens through which all subsequent events were viewed, is a tale of forbidden love and brutal retribution. Sometime in the 14th century, it is said that a monk from the Borley monastery began a clandestine affair with a nun from a nearby convent. Their love was a crime against God, a betrayal of their sacred vows. When their secret was inevitably discovered, they were brought before the monastery elders for judgment. The punishment was absolute and unsparingly cruel. The monk was hanged. The nun, in an act of unimaginable horror, was sentenced to be bricked up alive within the walls of the convent, left to slowly starve to death in a suffocating, lightless tomb. Whether this tale is historical fact or a piece of local folklore is impossible to prove. But its power is undeniable. It poisoned the very earth, creating a narrative of tragedy and unrest that would cling to the land for generations, just waiting for a new stage on which to play out its eternal drama. The first whispers, the Bull family, 1862 to 1927. Soon after Reverend Bull and his family moved into the newly completed rectory, the whispers began. The house, meant to be a sanctuary of faith, seemed to have an unseen occupant. Visitors and family members alike recounted hearing disembodied footsteps echoing through the long, empty halls. Doors would creak open and slam shut on their own. The air in certain rooms grew thick with a palpable unease, a feeling of being watched by an invisible presence. Had the construction disturbed something that lay dormant? Or had the spirits of Borley simply been waiting for new observers? For decades, these phenomena remained subtle, a collection of strange but dismissible events. But 1 year after the rectory's completion, the legend took root in a terrifyingly concrete way. The rectory was a hub for the local community, and children often came to play in its sprawling gardens. One afternoon, Reverend Bull was in his study when he heard the sounds of children playing inside the house. He was about to shoo them back outside when their laughter suddenly fell to hushed whispers. Their curiosity had led them into the drawing room in the east wing. The room was shrouded in shadow, and an immediate, unsettling chill fell over them. Pushing past their fear, they edged deeper into the gloom. At the far end of the room, near a large, imposing wardrobe, they saw it. A figure, pacing back and forth, barely visible in the darkness. The children froze, mesmerized and terrified, watching the shape move with a restless, sorrowful rhythm. Suddenly, it stopped. The figure turned and began to move towards them in one smooth, unnatural motion. As it drew closer, its face was illuminated by the faint light from the hall. It was the face of an old woman, with shrunken, dark eyes and skeletal, pointed features. She wore the black and white robes of a nun, which hung loosely on her frail frame. Then, the children saw the detail that broke their paralysis and sent them screaming from the room. She had no feet. She was gliding, floating silently across the floor towards them. The rector, drawn by their terrified cries, rushed to the drawing room to find the children huddled together in a state of shock. They babbled about a ghost, a nun who floated. He did his best to comfort them, dismissing their story as a product of overactive imaginations, but their shared terror left him with a niggling unedge. He returned to the drawing room, but of course it was empty. As he started back to his office, leaving the door ajar, it slammed shut behind him with a deafening crack. For the next 37 years, a strange peace settled over the rectory. But just days before Reverend Bull was due to retire, the shadows of the past returned. While working in his office, he was startled by the sound of a dozen children screaming from the courtyard. He looked out the window to see them sprinting away from the building in every direction, as if fleeing for their lives. He rushed outside and managed to catch the last two as they tried to escape. Their story was chillingly familiar. They had seen the spectral figure of a nun walking in the gardens, only this time she had vanished into thin air right before their very eyes. A macabre discovery. The Smith Residency, 1928 to 1930. After the Bull family departed, the rectory did not remain empty for long. Reverend Guy Smith and his wife, Mabel, moved in, unaware of the deep-seated strangeness of their new home. It was Mabel who would make the discovery that propelled the haunting from local legend to national news. While cleaning the old drawing room, the very same room where the children had their encounter, she opened the large, dusty wardrobe at the back. Hidden in a paper bag in a dark corner, she found a human skull. The authorities were contacted at once. Forensic analysis determined the skull was that of a young woman and was approximately 100 years old, but her identity could never be established. The Smiths gave the skull a proper Christian burial in the local churchyard. It was only after the skull was removed from the property that the full force of the haunting began. It seemed that times of upheaval, construction, new ownership, the removal of remains, acted as a catalyst for the powers on the site. The couple began to hear strange footsteps and loud, inexplicable bell ringing in the dead of night. Odd lights would appear in the windows from the outside. Most disturbingly, they claimed to witness the apparition of a phantom horse-drawn carriage, complete with a headless coachman, moving silently through the courtyard. Feeling isolated and terrified, the Smiths did what many in similar circumstances have done. They contacted the press. They hoped that by sharing their story with the Daily Mirror, someone might come forward who could help them. Their plea worked. The newspaper sent a reporter, and that reporter brought with him a man whose name would become forever synonymous with Borley Rectory, Harry Price, one of the most famous paranormal researchers in the country, and a prominent member of the Society for Psychical Research. Enter the ghost hunter. Harry Price's first investigation. On his first visit, Harry Price was merely there to assist the reporter, but he became a witness to a whole host of paranormal events. The reporter himself saw a dark, shadowy figure moving through the courtyard. When he tried to follow it, it vanished without a trace. As he turned to go back inside the rectory, a pane of glass fell from an upstairs window, shattering just inches from where he stood. When Price and the reporter rushed upstairs to investigate, a red glass candlestick whizzed past the reporter's head, narrowly missing him. Price was hooked. He knew Borley Rectory was a place of extraordinary significance. The paranormal activity only grew in intensity during the Smiths' tenure. After 2 years of escalating terror, they could take no more. They moved out, leaving the rectory vacant and its reputation for malevolence firmly established. The poltergeist and the pen. The Foister era. 1930 to 1935. The rectory's reputation as a den of paranormal activity reached its zenith with the arrival of Reverend Lionel Foister and his wife, Marianne. The Foisters would become the unwitting protagonists in the most violent and well-documented phase of the haunting. Their presence seemed to awaken the dormant forces within the walls, turning the house into a chaotic whirlwind of supernatural energy. Marianne, with her quiet and introspective nature, seemed to be the epicenter of the activity. She reported encounters that defied all logic. An unseen hand tugging at her clothing, disembodied whispers that echoed in the corridors, and objects that moved of their own volition. But it was the spirit's sensational need for communication that was most terrifying. Scrawled, desperate messages began to materialize on the walls, seemingly written by an invisible hand. Lionel, once a skeptic, was gradually drawn into the web of the supernatural. He began to meticulously document their experiences, capturing the events as they unfolded. Objects levitated, photographs revealed strange spectral forms, and the rectory itself seemed to have become a portal to the unknown. The activity grew increasingly violent. Heavy objects were thrown by an unseen force, windows were broken, and their daughter was mysteriously locked in a room that didn't even have a lock. The wall writings were particularly chilling. Appearing in multiple different handwriting styles, they were often directed at Marianne, with pleas like, "Marianne, please help get," and "Marianne, light, mass, prayers." The phenomena surrounding Marianne became so intense that it led to a shocking revelation that cast the entire haunting in a new, more ambiguous light. Marianne later confessed to having an affair with a lodger at the rectory. She claimed she had faked some of the paranormal activity to cover up her nighttime trysts, muddying the facts of the case forever. Did Marianne fake everything? Or did she simply embellish a genuine haunting to hide her own secrets? Her confession did nothing to dissuade the paranormal community. For them, the sheer volume and nature of the activity pointed to something real, even if it had been contaminated by human drama. The history of Borley, it seemed, was repeating itself, a story of illicit affairs and secrets hidden within the rectory's walls. The year of investigation, Price's return. The escalating chaos at Borley saw the return of Harry Price. Now a controversial figure, often accused of sensationalism, Price was determined to conduct the most thorough scientific investigation of a haunted house ever attempted. In 1937, he leased the rectory for a full year, assembling a team of dozens of observers to aid him in his research. Armed with scientific instruments, cameras, and a meticulous plan, he set out to unlock the mysteries of Borley once and for all. Price's séances within the rectory walls served as a catalyst for intensified activity. The veil between the living and the dead seemed to grow thinner than ever, and the house responded with a cacophony of knocks, unexplained phenomena, and more written messages. During one séance, a medium claimed to make contact with the spirit of the nun, who identified herself as a French nun named Marie Laire. She claimed she had been murdered on the site and buried in the cellar. The spirit also delivered a chilling prophecy. The rectory would be destroyed by fire, and in the rubble her bones would be found. Following another cryptic message, that appeared on the walls, Price's team began to excavate an old, bricked-up well on the grounds. Incredibly, their digging uncovered human remains, fragments of a skull and jawbone, seemingly belonging to a young woman. Price was convinced these were the remains of the long-forgotten nun. Ashes and echoes, the destruction and aftermath. 1 year after Price and his team concluded their investigation and left, the nun's prophecy came true. In 1939, the rectory's new resident, Captain W.H. Gregson, accidentally knocked over an oil lamp while unpacking boxes in the hall. The fire spread with terrifying speed, engulfing the old, dry building in flames. The Borley Rectory burned to the ground. The building was a ruin, but the haunting was not over. The shell of the house was finally demolished in 1944 as World War II came to a close. But the construction crew who tore it down claimed to experience a host of paranormal activity, from fleeting apparitions to tools that would mysteriously move on their own. The haunting had transferred from the building to the land itself. To this day, there are reports of sightings and strange events at the former site of the rectory and in the adjacent church. The activity, it seems, has spread, and the nun of Borley continues to walk. The Warrens and the cinematic nun. The modern legacy. This is where the story comes full circle, connecting the crumbling history of an English rectory to the modern horror icon. In the annals of paranormal investigation, few names hold the weight of Ed and Lorraine Warren. In the early 1970s, they ventured to Borley, dubbing it the most haunted place in Great Britain. With the rectory long gone, their investigation centered on Borley Church, where the remnants of the haunting still lingered. It was within the shadow of the church's ancient walls that Lorraine Warren had a profound and terrifying experience. Known for her psychic sensitivities, she reported feeling a powerful, oppressive energy the moment she stepped onto the grounds. Late one night, as they investigated the church, she was hit with the overwhelming presence of the nun. Their son-in-law later spoke of the incident, claiming that the encounter left a powerful imprint on Lorraine, that even after all they had witnessed over the years, still shook her to her core. Ed Warren, typically a steady and pragmatic presence, described an otherworldly chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. He recounted hearing faint whispers that emanated from the air itself, the ghostly echoes of bygone conversations and the laughter of children. But this encounter was only half of the inspiration for the cinematic nun. A few years later, back at her home in Connecticut, Lorraine had another, even more terrifying experience. While reading a book, she felt a familiar, malevolent presence. She looked up to see what she described as a swirling black mass. a vortex, blacker than the night, entering her room. Terrified but resolute, she commanded it to leave, and it seemingly obeyed. The filmmakers of the Conjuring universe, in a stroke of creative genius, merged these two distinct events. They took the historical legend and psychic impression of the tragic, ghostly nun of Borley and combined it with the visual horror of the dark, swirling vortex entity that Lorraine encountered at home. They gave this new composite entity the name of a historical demon, Valak, to ground it in occult lore. The result was the terrifying character we see on screen, a demonic force masquerading as a spectral nun. The legacy of Borley Rectory is a tangled tapestry of history, tragedy, folklore, and potential fraud. Was it a genuine haunting of a murdered nun? A case of mass hysteria fueled by a powerful legend? Or an elaborate hoax orchestrated by figures like Marianne Foyster and Harry Price? The truth is likely an unknowable combination of all three. But what remains is the enduring power of its story. A story that continues to captivate the curious and the courageous, beckoning us to peer beyond the veil. The nun on our screens may be a Hollywood monster, but her soul was born in the darkness of Borley, and her ghost still walks the quiet lanes of Essex.